this is great. I get to go last, so I can talk as long as I want after I cut off everybody else, right? I want to, both these talks have been fantastic, and I'm really glad Rich said one thing when he was talking about vegetable gardening. I am not a vegetable gardener, but I can give you the single best piece of advice if you're a new vegetable gardener, and Rich did say this. Start small. I see too many people who have big plans, and they see these potagers and do these big plans, and then it gets hot and you got a weed and the bugs are out there, and then you feel like you failed. That's kind of true with any kind of gardening. If you haven't done it before, start small. You can always go bigger, but when you start too big, you take on too much, and you feel like you failed at it when it's really just bit off more than you might be willing to chew. So do keep that in mind. So I get to talk about trees and shrubs. We are an arboretum here. We grow a lot of herbaceous plants. We actually have a beautiful, we do grow vegetables. If you go out by our yurt, our children's yurt, kind of in the at the far end of the arboretum, and the winter vegetable garden is looking fantastic right now. So do make sure you get out there. It's a little chilly outside, but not much worse than this room. So you can purchase a hat and a sweatshirt and get out and explore the garden today. Also want to mention we are taping these, and they will be on YouTube. It takes a little time to get them to edit them and whatever, get them on YouTube, but they will be on YouTube. If you're a member, you'll get a notice about that, or if you follow, I don't know what they call it, follow us, subscribe to us on YouTube, you'll get a notice that they're on there as well. So if you want to share them with anybody else, you want to revisit parts of it, you can skip the boring parts if there have been any that you don't want to listen to, get to them. You can get the names of the plants that Doug talked about, see some of those, that information that Rich had as well. I'm going to jump right in but start with a little bit about the Arboretum. As director here, I cannot help but talk about the Arboretum. It's my favorite thing to talk about. I've been here 12 years, and my wife has heard everything I have to say about the Arboretum, so I got to talk to new people about it. And the first thing I get asked by people who are new is, who is JC Raulston? We're the JC Raulston Arboretum. Who is he? JC came here in 1975. We date the starting of the Arboretum to 1976. He was very much of a, ask forgiveness, not permission kind of person. And he came here and was charged with growing the North Carolina green industry. And so he had been in a lot of places, and he had developed what he called the 40-90 rule. 40 plants made up 90% of the available market in any given region. So different plants from when he was in Texas at Texas A&M than here in Raleigh. But he thought, if everybody is growing the same 40 plants, how does anybody make more money? How do new people get into the market? It's impossible. And so he set about to diversify the American landscape. And how he did that was by bringing in trees and shrubs mostly here to the Arboretum, evaluating them, growing them, and then putting them out and getting them to other nurserymen. And that's really what made the Arboretum quite a bit different, is that we get those plants out. A lot of botanic gardens, and I've been working at botanic gardens for 2.5 decades now. A lot of the gardens say, we'll plant these things out, people will see them, they'll love them, they'll go get them. Well, they can't go get them if they're not available anywhere. So really, our part was, it's not just the evaluating them, it's getting them into the hands of the nurserymen and promoting them. So he started doing that. We continue to do that. In 2004, Horticulture Magazine commissioned this painting, The Heavenly Garden Party. These were the 25 most important gardeners who had passed away. So if you're in this audience, be glad you're not on here. There's still time for their next edition. But here's JC right here. He was considered one of the most important gardeners. You have people like Thomas Jefferson. There's no greater service you can do your country than to introduce a new plant. There's Elizabeth Lawrence, our North Carolina's own Elizabeth Lawrence. Got a lot of other folks. If you're a Rose person, got Graham Stewart Thomas and Gertrude Jekyll and Ernest Wilson, all kinds of great people. But JC was considered one of those people. He really changed the nursery industry. If you go into a big box store, you will find a greater diversity of plants in there than there were at the best garden centers 40 years ago when he was starting this. And so it really, he is one of the people that really changed the face of horticulture in the U.S. And I love this picture because they have him, if you can see that, it's a little small, but if you can see that, they've got him with a pair of pruners in his hands. And JC was well-known, infamous, notorious for liberating cuttings wherever he went. I am told, I don't know if it's true, but I am told that at one point he was not welcome at Kew Gardens because he had liberated some cuttings without permission, which is pretty funny because if you read the history of Kew Gardens, you'll know that they literally, under cover of night, smuggled rubber plants out of South America to bring to their colonies to grow, and smuggled tea out of China to India. So it's kind of rich that they got upset for him for taking a couple little cuttings. But JC couldn't understand why you would hoard a plant. If you were a botanic garden, why would you hold on to that plant? We can make more plants. There's a lot of things we can't make more of very easily. We can make more plants. So why would you hold on to it when a little 3-inch piece can create another plant, that we can create another plant, that we can create another 100, that we can create another 100,000 and get them out there. And so that's kind of always been our belief. It's always fun to say you have the first one of something, but we never want to be the only one to have it. As soon as we can propagate it, we get it out to people. If it's something that we keep killing, we'll send it to somebody else, send our only one to somebody else who grows it better than us. I mean, that's what we want, is to get those plants out. So there's a great book written by Bobby Ward, who's a longtime supporter of the Arboretum, longtime member, Chlorophyll in His Veins. It's a great book. It was fantastic for my marriage because my wife read it and she said, "Oh, it's not just you." She especially liked the part where he was cited for noxious vegetation in his at his home garden, and she's like, "Oh, I get it now." But it is a great read. You find out how Agent Orange got its name. Who knew? JC worked with Agent Blue when he was in the military in Vietnam. Very interesting. So an arboretum, what is an arboretum? People ask that. If you're part of the city and you're making signs, you might not even be able to spell arboretum correctly. We've had some interesting signs out there. But this is where we grow sticks. An arboretum is a collection of trees and shrubs, a documented collection. And so we continue that legacy of JC. We evaluate plants. We have 10.5 acres. We grow about 7,000 different plants out here. And unlike some gardens where they'll how old this plant is, we've had it 100 years. One of the first plants Hugh smuggled out of some country, and it's 300 years old. We don't do that. We cut things down once we've evaluated them. Our collection is always changing. It's a dynamic collection, but we do try and do it in landscape settings, and I think we do have some pretty nice looking areas of the garden. Maybe a new battery in here.
I just put new batteries in it.
Get the beauty shots. So we are part of the university. We're in the Department of Horticultural Science, which means we get no money. The university pays for my salary as director, and they pay for our housekeeper's salary, which says a lot about what they think of one of us or the other, or relative importance. She is certainly more important than me because we'd be covered in filth if it wasn't for Erlinda. So, and we generate the rest of our income. We work with students, of course. And this is really wrong. You shouldn't say young people because we have about 300 active volunteers who put in 14,000 volunteer hours last year working out here, and everything from working at our front desk and stuffing envelopes to putting mulch out and propagating plants and working special events. But the students are fantastic at NC State. I am not an NC State grad. I have college-age kids, and I'm pretty iffy on them. But these NC State horticulture students are phenomenal. They are so good. They really, really are. I love working with them. And, you know, they come out here, we're part of the university, so we have labs, we have everything from, you know, horticulture, of course, but we get chemistry out here, we get forestry out here doing work, we get ag engineering, ag education, we get, unfortunately, we get plant pathology and entomology out here, plant biology. Do you know NC State does not have a botany department? They have plant biology. Does anybody know why? And this was told to me by a department head. It's because when you're rising, you know, getting ready to graduate from high school, everybody wants to be a marine biologist or a veterinarian, and so they Google biology, and they get tricked into seeing plant biology there, and so at some point, you know, anatomy or something gets too hard, they get switch over into plant biology. You know, and if you give direction, they do a great job. I give talks all over the place. I give, you know, all over the country, all over the U.S., and I was giving a talk in England for the Royal Horticulture Society. It was a group of very proper Royal Horticulture Society. And, you know, use that pause here for a little chuckle. Dead silence. That reads really differently in England. All right, let's jump in and talk about plants. This is so hard for me to narrow down a list of plants to talk about great plants. And there's a list there, so you don't have to write it all down. And you're lucky because I've moved away. I don't normally do lists anymore because people pay more attention to their piece of paper than they do to me. And that's bad for my ego. And I often get asked to talk about the newest of the new. You know, what's brand new, what's cutting edge, which I love as well. But it's good to go back and talk about some of these things that have been around for a while that are really great. Although I do have a few new things in here. This isn't that old one, but a red bud, Cercis canadensis. And I have common names on your thing. If you're a new gardener, learn these Latin names. They're so much easier than the common names. I mean, the common name redbud says nothing about this plant because there's nothing red about it at all. So redbuds, we hold a national collection of redbuds here. It's really one of our signature collections. We send material off all over the world to be studied. It's a really great thing. And there are so many good ones. This is a native tree. It's native over most of at least the eastern half of the U.S. from Canada down through at least South Georgia. And there are a lot of different ones, and they're mostly all pretty good plants. This is one I particularly like. This is a smaller one that fits into more landscapes. Ace of Hearts, really heavy bloomer. It can be a single trunk or multi-trunk tree like this. But what I love about it, it's got these really small leaves. The red buds all have heart-shaped leaves. They flower early spring. But I love the Ace of Hearts. I love these tiny leaves, and they're arranged so perfectly on the plant. It's really hard to get that unless you see it in person, but every leaf is like perfect. They're all angled exactly the same. We actually have a former director who's a redbud breeder who had a graduate student like measuring the angles of the leaves because there's something so special about this plant. Easy to grow. It's an understory tree, so typically grows in the shade, but it's fine in full sun. Really, some red buds in really blazing hot, dry sites, you'll get some burning on there. But typically in an average garden, they do just fine. Another native tree, and sometimes, I should mention, sometimes we get accused of not liking native plants. And that's not true. We like all plants if they're good garden plants. We like a lot of plants that aren't good garden plants that you could probably find out here. And so we really don't, we're looking at cultivated landscapes, and we don't care if it's native or non-native. And to be honest with you, most other things out in the landscape, out in the natural world, don't care a whole lot either. People tell you pollinators need native plants. It's not true. There's no good research that shows that. There is good research that says it's all about size and shape of flower. And there are plenty of things like that eat, our hostas and stuff like that. So they don't, the other animals don't have a problem with it. But we like them if they're good plants. Nyssa sylvatica, black gum. Widespread plant, grows native here. There are a lot of good selections of it. It can be a medium to large tree. You'll see it growing in really dry spots in the wild. You'll see it growing in almost permanently damp spots in the wild. But one thing it almost always has in common is it's great fall color. This is one with really good kind of orangey color. Usually it's more of a burgundy or a red. There's some great selections, like Wildfire is kind of the industry standard that's got really deep, nice color. But they tend to be kind of upright trees. No flowers to speak of. It has flowers, you just won't notice them. But really just a lovely evergreen tree. I mean, a lovely green tree during the summer, and then that fantastic fall color. Now, one of the most underutilized native trees, and it's a real shame, is yellowwood. Clodrastus kentuckea, sometimes seen as Clodrastus lutea. A lot of our native flowering trees, they'll flower before they have leaves. Think dogwoods and the red buds. This one comes on a little bit later in spring after it's leafed out. It gets these panicles of white flowers just ripping. And often it's hard to find this plant in the trade. And there's one simple reason for that is it is an ugly plant as a young plant. It is like, most of us, if we went back and looked at our yearbook pictures, it's a little awkward as a teenager. Often not very well branched, just kind of a plant. But you give it a couple of years in the landscape, and all of a sudden it becomes this really, really spectacular tree. So it's worth seeking out, and it's worth doing a little bit of work training it as a young plant to get it like this. Because it just, some of the, when you ask some of really great plants people, what is one tree, one flowering tree that you just think is criminally underappreciated, and it's this yellowwood with these kind of icicle white flower panicles hanging down. Flowers best in sun. Will take some shade, but it doesn't flower quite as well. Doesn't get quite as nice a shade. This is one growing here locally. There is a pink form called Perkins pink you can sometimes find if you really dig. That always sounds like it's going to be better. Oh, yeah, I want the pink form because horticulturists are always looking for the extreme forms of things. Dwarf, fastigia, different color flowers. It's nice, but it's not as good. Go for the straight species. Another great native, and really this wasn't intentional that I put all these natives together, is fringe tree. And this is one that, so I learned it as fringe tree. I know other people who learned it as Grancy graybeard, which I have a hard time saying with a straight face if I were talking about plants seriously. Kyananthus virginicus. A great little tree. They're using it as a parking lot tree out at Centennial Campus. They've got a whole bunch of them. And I kind of scoffed. I don't think of this as a tree that's tough enough to take those kind of conditions. But out kind of across from the library, they have a bunch there. And I watched it for several years. Watched it daily when I was writing the book because I was out at Hunt Library writing just about daily, it felt like. And it really performed quite well. I think of it as something that needs kind of a moist soil that wants a bit of shade to really perform. But it actually did surprisingly well, which kind of moved it up my list of really good plants. Got to hold your mouth just right for this. Kyananthus are male and female. There are some plants that are male and female. Like a lot of these things, like Doug said, we like to say things are black and white. I used to say they're not quite as black and white in plants as they are in people, but hey, it's 2020. It's not quite as black and white with people either. So plants are just like people, I think. So the Kyananthus, the male, you can get named selections that are male or female. There's not a lot of them, and it tends to be more the male ones, because males have showier flowers than the females, for whatever reason. They're not like birds. They're not, choosing a mate, but the females do get little fruits. That can be quite nice as well. We had a tree here that was male for years. 2007, we had that 100-year drought. Well, some of y'all are new, you may not know that. We had a 100-year drought in 2007, and the next year, our male Kyananthus fruited. So it's plants want to survive, and they're not. They can do some changes. That was actually the Chinese Fringe tree, which I'm going to get to as soon as I can move a slide. And they can get good fall color. That's our native Fringe tree. That's a pretty good fall color. The oranges and reds and things get all the press, but yellow is pretty nice as well. Chinese Fringe tree. If somebody were to come to me and say, what is one flowering tree that is just going to perform? I'm not a gardener. I don't want to mess with plants. I want something that is going to be tough as nails. This would be the plant that I would tell them. A colleague of mine gave a talk where he was talking about great small to medium flowering trees, and he sent a survey out to a whole bunch of people all across the country, and about 75% of the respondents listed Chinese Fringe tree, Kyananthus retusus, as one of their top one or two just tough, reliable plants. This is a male form. You can see how showy it is. Of course, if it goes through a drought, it may switch over to female. The one that I was talking about is actually a Chinese Fringe tree. This one's a very old one. Really think of them more as 25, 35 feet tall plant. They're a little bit better for sun than our native ones. Certainly tougher. Really, there's a lot of potential in those, and probably a lot of potential for selecting some better forms.
So as you go through these small to medium trees, if we're interested in maybe incorporating one of these, what height recommendation do you have for when you go in the nursery to purchase it?
Okay, that's a great question. So the question was, if we're interested in one of these trees, what kind of height recommendation do you have for purchasing it? I give a whole talk called Plants and Plans from a Lazy Gardener, because I am a lazy gardener very much. I like digging small holes. I don't like digging big holes. So when we have our big plant giveaway, where we give away 4,000 plants, we have our cart, a lot of those plants are in those little 3.5-inch pint pots, and that's because things really establish well from that size. So personally, I would get, for something like this, maybe a 3-gallon plant. That's what I'd get. No problem if you want to get a bigger plant and plant it out, you get more immediate impact. There's been some good research from Cornell and other places that'll show that if you put in a 1-caliper tree, it takes it about a year before it really does much growing. If you put in a 3-inch caliper tree, it takes about 3 years or so before it really starts growing, and so on. For every inch of caliper, a tree kind of sits. And generally, the smaller trees will catch up pretty close to the larger trees over that period. So it depends on how patient you are. So I'm lazy, I don't like to dig big holes, and I am cheap as all get out. So I'm like, it just makes more sense. But, if it's a, high profile spot in your garden, you may want to go get a, 6-inch caliper ball and burlap, big old huge tree that they bring in with a crane. It's just all kind of preference. But I think plants establish better as small plants. I like planting 1 gallons, 1 quart, 1 pint for our woody plants.
Does this one have the fall color as well?
It can. It's pretty variable, but typically not nearly as good. Yeah. But those gorgeous flowers. And you say that's about as good as you get. That's about as good as you get for it. And that was our tree the first year it fruited after that drought. I was talking with somebody earlier about fruiting trees. People like fruiting plants. you know, and if you've moved here from the north, just, unless you really want to spray and work at it, stay away from the apples and peaches and things. They're tough here, unless you really work at them. You can grow them, but there are some things that are much easier. Japanese persimmons. There are some really amazing ones. I was looking at some old information from 1916 report from the USDA. They imported like 25 different selections of Japanese persimmon, most of which I don't think are in cultivation. But they make great big fruits, and you can get ones that are astringent, that need to be subject to freezing temperatures. If you've ever eaten our native persimmon before freezing, it'll turn your mouth inside out. Or you can get ones that are sweet that never need that. But and you can get, with the Japanese persimmons, you can get ones that get kind of mushy like our native ones, or ones that are really firm that you eat more like an apple but are sweet. Fuyu is really kind of the one you can find easily in the U.S.
Are the deer eating my persimmons? Is that where they're going?
Are the deer eating your persimmons? Is that where they're going? Maybe? I don't know. Squirrels sometimes will get them.
I mean, they're 8 feet off the ground.
Squirrel, well, if they're 8 feet, it's probably not the deer. They'll jump 8 feet to go over a fence, but not usually to eat things. Although if it's right, you know, if it's something they can stand up on, they will get up on their hind legs and eat things. But more likely squirrels or birds, I would think. The other nice thing about the Japanese persimmon as compared to our native one is it's a small tree. It doesn't get really large, so it only gets, you know, 20, 25 feet generally. But it gets great fall color. Isn't that nice? Oh. Yeah, it's a beautiful plant. I'd like to get more. I'd really like to get a bunch more here to try them. I have seen them in Japan. They grow a lot of them. It's Japanese persimmon. And I was over there in mid-October a few years back, and everywhere I went in like stores, they all had the little Japanese persimmons, and they all done with Sharpie, made little jack-o'-lanterns out of them. China is now getting into Halloween too, by the way. It's pretty funny being over there for that. Ginkgo. Love ginkgo biloba. You know, it's good for your memory. It's a beautiful tree. A real ancient tree. It's actually related to conifers. More related to conifers than to flowering trees. They make big plants. If you grow them from seed, they're very irregular. You'll get thin, sparse ones. You get full, dense ones. This is another one that's male and female, and this is important. You get a male or female fringe tree, you know, you may get fruit, you may not, you may get showier flowers, you may not. If you get a female fringe tree, and it gets pollinated, you get ginkgo fruit. Ginkgo fruit, when it falls off the tree, it smells like a cross, and this is not just me thinking of two bad things. This is really what it smells like. It smells like a cross between vomit and dog doo. It is not good. It is not good. Now the seed inside there, you can roast that seed and it's delicious. It's one big seed in the middle, but you got to clean all that flesh off to do that. And no thank you. So the moral of that is, do not buy a plant that says ginkgo biloba on the label. Remember Doug talked about cultivars, right? Buy a named cultivar. Princeton Century is kind of the industry standard, but there are more. There are a lot of really narrow ones that are coming out now, but make sure what you're getting is a male form. You do not want the female. It is not pleasant in your garden. And even worse, when I was in college, my roommate used to take the fruit and he would put them on people's carburetors. And that smell lasts just about all winter long. But there's another nice thing about ginkgo. If you moved here from up north, you may remember that in fall, leaves fell off the trees, kind of, you know, in a pretty short period. If you've been here through a fall, you may notice that our oaks drop leaves for about 3 months. In fact, you probably, if you have some big southern red oaks in your garden right now, they probably still have leaves. You've already raked away, you know, waist-high piles of leaves across your whole yard. Well, ginkgo turns brilliant gold in the fall. just gorgeous gold. And then, in the course of about, I like to say an hour, but really maybe more, 48 hours, whew, they all fall. And then you can enjoy them as this gold carpet around your tree for a day or two, and then you can rake them up and be done with it. They're gone. It is great. Oh, I love that. I purposely moved into a house with no oaks in my front yard because I did not want to have to rake leaves. And my neighbor, unprompted by me, just planted a ginkgo this year, so I'm very excited. There are a lot of named forms. There's some little dwarf ones out there. There are a lot of narrow ones now, but Saratoga's old, Princeton Century. Go for one of those named ones and do a little research because they have different forms. Some are kind of open and narrow. Some have a more round head. Maples. We love our maples. Despite what some students think, our logo is a Japanese maple leaf. It is not a pot leaf, although NC State is going hard into the hemp research, so, who knows. And there are a lot we're really known for our Japanese maples, but there's so many great maples. One of the best small, medium street trees, and they're used some downtown Glenwood South, are trident maples, Acer bergerianum. Trident maples. This is one, look at that perfect round head. Isn't that beautiful? Gorgeous plant. They're so tolerant of being in bad conditions, compacted soil. They are on Glenwood South. Have you ever been to Glenwood South about 12:30, 1 o'clock on a Thursday, Friday, Saturday? There is a lot of stuff going on under those trees that they'll put up with that. They'll put up with anything. But they're really nice trees. I thought I had one with some fall colors. They have variable fall colors, sometimes good, sometimes bad. Or not good, I should say, about 35 feet tall. There are a lot of selections out there. We have some gold ones here. We have ones with curled leaf, we have dwarf ones. There's always a lot of these cultivars out there, but every one I've grown has been a really good plant. Now, so if you know your Latin names, you would know Cornus is dogwood. Our native dogwood, Cornus florida. We have shrubby native dogwoods as well. This is not a native one. This is an Asian one. Cornus moss. This is what the British call cornelian cherries. And it's one of the real early plants to flower. You can see nothing has a leaf on it now. We actually, I think in the arrangement, either in the bathroom or out here, we have a branch of cornelian cherry there with those kind of starburst-like bright gold flowers. You can make kind of an open tree, multi-stemmed, or you can do it as a single stem. And it's followed, the flowers are followed later on in the summer and the fall with these almost cherry-like looking fruits, which are edible. I always tell people if somebody says something's edible, just keep in mind, I saw on That's Incredible when I was a child, a person eat a car. So anything is edible if you try hard enough. Always ask, is it palatable? Right. You will not want to pluck the cornelian cherries off here and eat it. If you have a lot of sugar, you can make a very good jelly out of it. If you have enough sugar, you can make a pretty good jelly out of most anything. But it does add to that kind of edible plant kind of a palette out there that foodscaping. Some of them have really, really nice bark. There's kind of two species, Cornus moss and Cornus officinalis, both very similar, but some of them have beautiful peeling bark, and then they're really nice all summer long. Grow them in the sun, grow them in shade. They're pretty easy wherever. Going into shrubs, osmanthus. I always say that if you can't grow osmanthus, you shouldn't live there. All you people who came from Duluth and places up north and couldn't grow the tea olive or osmanthus, you made the right move because it is not fit for humans to live there. You can go up there and ski if you want, but come back to where you can grow good plants. This is one of the most fragrant plants in the world. It is so delightful. It makes a big evergreen shrub, and when it flowers, everywhere in the garden will smell magical. There's a variety, an orange flowered variety called variety aurantiacus. There's yellow flowered variety Thunbergii. There are cultivars of those. One that I'm really fond of is one called Apricot Echo, which has an orange flower, but it really flowers off and on multiple times, and new growth is a really nice red on it. Fatsia, one of the toughest plants around. So tropical looking. He's got these great big palmately lobed leaves. Makes a really nice round shrub. Little slow growing to get going, so it's sometimes expensive in the nursery or even hard to find. But I've seen it in Japan and China. They will plant it under highway overpasses and planting beds where it is never getting any sunlight, never getting any water, and somehow it manages to survive once it's established. This is it in flower. It flowers in the summer, and then it's followed by little black fruits. Really great plants for kind of giving that tropical look. And it's evergreen, so you get that tropical look with an evergreen plant. There are some variegated ones. Murakumo Nishiki is one I like. It's being sold as camouflage, so you can go to, I saw it at Homewood Garden Center as camouflage, but it's Murakumo Nishiki. There's one called Spiderweb, kind of an interesting variegated one that grows true from seed. You can collect seed off it and sow it, and they'll all be variegated. But the more fertility you have, the better your soil is. You've been following all Rich's advice for the vegetable garden and your other landscape, and it'll have less and less of the white on there. So this really likes it to be a little bit leaner. So sometimes people will buy it, and, in the nursery they're pushing it, so giving a lot of fertilizer, and they're like, they get it, maybe mail order, and like, it's all green, I got the wrong plant, they ripped me off. I say, put it in the ground, give it a year, it'll start showing that. Hollies, we have some great native hollies. The Yopon hollies, Ilex vomitoria. Carolina ruby is one with great color. There's yellow ones as well, like Yawkey, which we may get to see.
How big does that get?
So yeah, so Ilex vomitoria can get to be a pretty large tree. 25, 30 feet in the wild. You can limb it up as a single trunk tree. They can be beautiful. There are dwarf forms. There's Schilling's dwarf, which is a little low mounding, almost like a foundation plant or stokes. So you can kind of get different sizes. Yawkey's a medium-sized one. In 10 years, you're looking at 10 to 15 feet tall, multi-branch plant. Usually I don't like the gold-fruited hollies as much. It always sounds interesting, but they're never as showy. This one actually is incredibly showy. It's maybe the showiest one we grow. Not commercially available, but we often propagate it and sell it, put it in our giveaways, all kinds of things like that. We grow a lot of agaves and yuccas and these kind of what we think of as Southwest plants. But there are a couple of yuccas that are actually native to North Carolina, so it's not that far out of the place. This is the Yucca rostrata. That's a trunk one. It is from the west. If you buy it, usually it won't have a trunk. It'll just be a little mound of strappy foliage. But over time, quicker than you would think, it'll form a trunk and become a small tree. We have several going around. This is one a little bit younger, still in a pot, but it will form that trunk and be pretty amazing. All they need is good drainage. People think a lot of these desert plants can't handle the amount of rain we get here. They actually love it. They grow so much faster here than they do in the Southwest, but they need really good drainage. So as long as you've built your soil up to have good drainage, man, they love that water. Now, some of the desert plants don't like our humidity in the summer, and that's a different thing. The agaves and yuccas, they've got no problem with our humidity, but they don't want wet feet. But they're great. I love things like this in containers because you don't have to water them. I don't water plants. Acubas are an ongoing obsession for me. The old gold dust plant, you may know, a lot of them are ugly things. As it was said to me by somebody in England, this parking lot plants, aren't they? Yes, meaning people buy them. And we're here to support the green industry. And so plants that people actually buy are good plants. But they don't all have to be green plants or yellow spotted green plants. There are some cool ones like Natsu Nukomo. New growth comes out pure white and then it goes green. It is as showy or showier than most spring flowering plants. If you do want a speckled plant, this is the one to get. If you're going to buy one speckled akuba, Asoba hoshifu. It is readily available in the trade in North Carolina now. Thanks in part because we've been trialing these akubas, and we went there and said, this is the one. Glossy leaves, really good speckling, doesn't get that tired, ugly look that a lot of akuba do. Best in some shade, but it'll take some sun, but really want to do it in shade. Again, male and female plants. The female ones get red berries. Unfortunately, Asoba hoshifu is a male, so you don't get those red fruit on there, but still you're growing it for this glossy evergreen variegated foliage, not for the fruit. Hydrangeas. We have native hydrangeas here. Hydrangea arborescens is our native mountain hydrangea. I thought when I first saw pictures of Incrediball that it had been photoshopped or juiced or something because it had these great big flower heads. It actually was not photoshopped. That's what it does, these great big heads. This is great for people who struggle with how do I prune my hydrangea? You know, that's all. What do I do with my hydrangea? These you prune back to the ground every year if you want. They come up and they flower every year on that new growth. In fact, most of the arborescens are better if you cut them back every year. You get bigger flowers, but Incrediball has nice sturdy stems. We have it growing out in full blazing sun, but really you think of it more as a shade plant. But it seems to do well in our full sun as well. Calicarpa, the beautyberries. So we have a native beautyberry. Down in Georgia, they all call it a ditchweed, Calicarpa americana. I'm going to show one of those a little bit later. But if you've never seen a beautyberry in fruit, you're missing out. Our native one has these glossy metallic purple fruits, about the size of BBs, that are just amazing. They're great pollinator plants as well when they're in flower. This is a hybrid that was introduced by NC State. Pearl Glam. It's got purplish foliage on there, flowers heavily, fruits heavily, sun or shade. It doesn't seem to bother it one way or another. Really cool plant.
Can you propagate those or something?
Oh yeah, these propagate very easily from cuttings, so they're easy to do. Almost all the Calicarpas propagate very, very easily. This one tends to be a little more upright. One of its parents is Calicarpa Chicokiana, which is a more upright, and that's where it gets the purple in the leaves. You can see that close up. That's not bad in the fall, is it? Also from the same breeder, Tom Ranney, one of the best breeders in the world for landscape plants, are two new star bushes, as he's calling them, anise shrubs, anise trees. The native ones, they're Asian ones, they're Mexican ones of an anise, Elysium. Best thing about Elysium, deer don't eat them. Deer don't eat them. Evergreen shrubs that deer don't eat. But most of them get to be big old honking plants. They get tall, they get big. So Tom brought them down in height a bit. So you got Scorpio with the red flowers and Orion with the white flowers. They are 4 foot by 4 foot shrubs as opposed to 12 foot by 8 foot shrubs. And they keep blooming. They bloom on and off and on and off regularly with large flowers. The flower smell is not wonderful.
We have Elysium, they get really big, but they don't flower.
Yeah, sometimes the native ones, especially the Elysium parviflorum, don't flower a whole lot, and the flowers are quite a bit smaller. That could be just if it's a wild clone. Sometimes those take a lot longer. It's just like if you go dig up a dogwood out of the woods, it often doesn't flower very well, very heavily. Doesn't flower until much later. Whereas if you go buy a named one, it flowers prolifically. So there's part of it that if you want a big one that flowers a lot, get something like woodland ruby, which is a great flowering form. It could be, if it's in shade, it could be getting too much shade. That could be it. They'll grow in deep shade and they'll grow in bright sun. The biggest difference is with Elysium, if you grow them in bright sun, the leaves tend to go real kind of olive green, whereas in more shade, they'll be a darker green. But you can see these are out in full sun and they're pretty good dark green. That's the light is new growth coming on there. but good plants, good for hedging or whatever, especially if you have deer problems. All right, now I said I'm not talking about brand new plants, but here are a couple brand new plants that are releases from the JC Raulston Arboretum and Denny Werner, our former director. I mentioned started with red buds. These are some weeping red buds, Golden Falls. Previously, we had released Ruby Falls, which had purple leaves. This is a weeping red bud with these chartreuse gold heart-shaped leaves. Very fast grower, really beautiful plant. You know, for a real kind of specimen spot. You know, weeping trees, it's probably hard to work a lot of those into the landscape, but this thing is really something else. And the other new one just released is Flamethrower, which comes out burgundy, goes through kind of a corally, coppery color, and then chartreuse. It is spectacular, and I mean, really is. And those are from the Arboretum, and just really they'll be available this year in larger numbers. Do want to tell you about, there is a program, we work with some of the local nurseries, the wholesale nurseries and the retail folks on a program we call Choice Plants, and it's not a whole lot of things we put in there, but some stuff that really works well in the landscape. So if you look for those tags, the Choice Plants tags, I'm not going to go through all of them, but there are several that have been very good. Raulston Hardy dwarf viburnum, a native southeastern viburnum that makes just a little low 3 foot by 3 foot mound or so, with white flowers heavily in April and then off and on through the rest of the season. It's extremely drought tolerant. Again, that 2007 drought, viburnums were really hit hard, but this species, Viburnum obovatum, was one that really all of the forms looked great. However, the plant in the wild is this ugly, loose, open, big thing that nobody is going to want to put into their typical suburban landscape. But this dwarf one is really good. Mostly evergreen. It'll drop leaves if it gets really cold, but mostly evergreen. Another red bud, one that we introduced, it's one that we've been growing and evaluating for years and years. It's a Chinese one. We named it Kay's Early Hope because it flowers right in time for Women's March Madness, so we named it for Kay Yao after she had passed away. Kind of a small, typically multi-stem tree, although you can get single-stemmed ones, about 15 or so feet tall. I think I got a picture of the whole plant. This is the original plant. It is usually the first red bud to start flowering for us in the winter, and it is generally the last one to finish. It will be fully leafed out, it will be forming fruit on there, and it'll still be opening up new flowers on there. So just extremely long period of bloom and extremely heavy flower. Nurserymen love this plant. There's the Raulston Hardy Viburnum. You see a full-grown plant and flower. I mentioned our native beautyberry. Typically they're bright purple fruits. This is one that's pink, Welch's pink, found out west. Great plant. Birds love the fruits. They'll go through, if you have a bunch of beautyberries, they'll go through and eat all the purple fruited ones first. Then they'll eat this pink one, and then the white ones. So you kind of get a succession of birds feasting on these things. A weeping boxwood, Buxus unraveled, really strongly weeping boxwood. Another one that the nurserymen around here really are loving. Sometimes you can find it where they've staked it up to a standard, and then it makes this little evergreen weeping tree. Ours is just kind of making a little weeping mound, but it'd be great going over walls and things like that. And it's quick growing, very quick growing for a boxwood. Here's it quite a few years ago. All right, just a few things before we finish up about actually planting your trees. You know, we talked about soils quite a bit. Best thing you can do for your soils, whether you have heavy clay or you have sand, is add compost. How many people have seen something like this? Yeah, a lot. See somebody taking a picture of it. That's great. So you should mark that picture dumb. Layer of sticks 4 to 6 inches, then a layer of brown, then a layer of brown, green, and then brown, green. Keep it as wet as a wrung out sponge. That is ridiculous. If you look at that, you're like, well, I'm not going to compost because how on earth am I going to get this alternating layers of green and brown material to put in my compost pile? Pro tip, 25 years doing this professionally, when plants die, they compost. That's what they do. If you don't keep it as wet as a wrung out sponge, you know what happens? It stops. All the little bacteria and things breaking down, they just stop. You know what happens when it gets wet again? They start back up. All you need to know to compost things is when you're starting a new compost pile, you need to add some soil because you got to get those little microbes and things going in there. So add a shovel full of soil in there when you start to get all those little critters that are naturally there in the soil going. Pile it up. If you want to water your compost pile, I like yuccas in pots because I don't water containers, but if you want to water your compost pile, fine, you can do that. You add things to it. If you add a lot of grass clippings, they tend to mat and they can cause some problems, so you may not want to put a lot on there. If it starts to smell like ammonia, that means there's not enough oxygen in there. Get in there with a good pitchfork and turn it over a little bit. It'll do its thing. Just give it time. Plan on having 2 compost piles. Have one that's working, one that you're using. But also, I have people who say, you know, I've tried composting and it doesn't work. And I'll be visiting them and they'll show me this. This is finished compost. If you buy compost, they have big machines that turn it and they temperature probes get the temperature right and they keep it just right moist. And then when you order it, it goes through a big sifter and what you get is this beautiful black compost that's gorgeous. If you do it at home, you will be able to tell that it was once plants as part of your compost. You won't if you buy it from somebody and pay a lot of money. But there will be pieces of leaves and there'll be twigs and there'll be, you know, there's stuff in there and that's okay. It's all carbon. Carbon's carbon. That's what you're looking for. You just want to get that carbon in there because that really helps with the soil structure and the drainage and the soil retention. So that is fine. I live on a cul-de-sac by the woods. I make a compost pile in the woods and I'm always like, you know, yeah, I'm going to use this and out in the garden. And then after a while, I'm like, oh, look, nice raised bed right here. And I just start planting right into my compost pile. But whatever, you know, like I said, carbon's carbon. If you're in Maine, hey, lobster compost, right? You know, if you got cotton debris or peanut shells around here, makes great compost. Whatever you have, it's just about getting that carbon in the soil. Whatever it takes. Mulch is a source of organic matter too. We mulch out. If you go out in the Arboretum, you'll see that we mulch with leaves, partially composted leaves. It's partially because we have 300 active volunteers putting in 14,000 hours that we can do that because those leaves break down and we have to redo it. But that, every time they break down, they're helping build the soil. If you put down a compost and your goal is for it to last as long as possible, you're doing very little to help the soil. That's okay, but just keep that in mind. We look at our mulch as part of our composting regimen, part of our soil building. But there is such a thing as too much. That's no good. That critters live in there, will gnaw on the barks of your trees, it'll rot it out. You don't need to do that. You know, people always talk about invasive plants, but the real harm is invasive, as bad horticultural practices. That's what's invasive. They just spread. They go everywhere. So you don't need those mulch volcanoes. We've been spending the last several decades trying to get landscape companies from doing this. I guarantee you, leaf and limb, if they go plant a tree for you, they're not making a mulch volcano for you because they know what they're doing. Also, I won't go into this, but don't buy bad plants. If you're a new gardener, you go into a garden center and you go and you find their stuff that's half price, you know, or you know, 75% off. And this is what you get. This is a bad plant. You don't buy bad stuff with anything else you do. You don't go, hey, this meat is only half rotten. Let me buy this because it's cheap. Don't do that. Buy good plants. Plants are cheap. To get a 3-gallon flowering shrub, it takes at a minimum 18 months, usually more like 2 or 3 years to produce that plant. Think about any other thing that you purchase that takes 18 months to 3 years to produce. How much would you pay for it? And people will go, $30 for this 3-gallon plant, that's too much. I'm afraid it might die. Most of the plants you get will live, and they will get bigger and become more valuable with time. What else does that? Nothing else does that. Plants are a good investment. You will go and you will spend $50 at Dead Lobster and get a bad meal and not think twice about it, and then you look at a plant that's 30 bucks and you say it's too expensive. It's not too expensive. It took years to produce that $30 plant. It is so cheap, it ought to be selling to you for $200 a piece, and you should be happy to pay $200 for it. Don't buy bad plants. Before I go on to let me also say, I get this all the time. People ask me questions. They say, I've got this plant. It's really big. I got to cut it back 3 times a year. What's the best way to deal with it? And when I say rip it out, they'll say, but it's healthy. They hate the plant and they won't get rid of it. If you don't like the plant you have, get rid of it. 2 best times I have in the garden is when I plant a plant and when I rip it out. Love it. You get space to plant new things when you rip it out. If a plant is not making me happy, it is gone. So I want to put in a plug for the Arboretum. Become a member. We got a lot of benefits for membership. One of the big ones is first Saturday in October, we give away usually 3,500 to 4,000 plants. Give away. Give away. Go on YouTube and look up JC Raulston Arboretum Friends Distribution. It's a lot of fun. You'll see what we're doing. It's not. It used to be scary at one point. We have tamed it. It is a calmer, gentler. But people go away very happy. People go away very, very happy. And they leave here with all those plants, and then they can go buy expensive plants, even if their spouse doesn't like them to. And they can say, look, for $200, look at all the plants I got. You just don't say that only 2 of those plants cost $100 each, or 50. Or, just get used to the weeds. That's the easiest way to garden. So, I was going to talk about this, but it's sold out coming up in a couple weeks. Another good reason to be a member, this sold out in almost a couple weeks. Our summer camps just went on sale this past Monday. Last I saw, we had 16 spots left, and 5 of the 8 summer camps were filled. So, members get first notice of these things. So, Raulston Blooms. Hope you all come out April 4th. Again, there's a minimum charge to come in. Unless you're a member, then it's free. You also get 10% off our plants at the plant sale. We have other plant vendors. We have a big birdhouse competition. Bird and other wildlife houses, bees, bats, butterflies, whatever you want to do. Love for you to participate in that if you are the creative type. Look for that. We have talks. We have food trucks. It's a lot of fun stuff for kids. Consider coming out for that. It is April 4th. If you're a member, you can do the plant sale April 3rd from 4 to 6 or 7. It's a preview sale. Also want to plug, since y'all are all here to listen to people talk about plants, June 12th and 13th, we have a joint program with Juniper Level Botanic Garden, Plant Delights Nursery, Southeastern Plant Symposium. 16 phenomenal speakers all talking about plants. It is like Plantapalooza. It is amazing. People coming in from Greece to speak. It'll be at the Sheraton downtown because we don't have room for it here. But we have some of the best plants people in the world coming in to speak. Members benefits, look into that if you're not a member. If you are a member, make sure you're using it. Get discounts at garden centers. Fantastic. Love having y'all here. Once again, I want to thank Leaf and Limb for their support that they give us for the work. Also, what they're doing to educate people about the importance of trees and the importance of them in our lives. They're really doing some amazing things. Look them up on the web. There's been some really, really fascinating news about what they're doing. Really exciting stuff that is just cutting edge and completely thinking in a different way than almost anybody else across the country, and they're amazing. If you're not getting signed up for their blog and their newsletter, you're missing out because it is great information. It is not a sales pitch. They want to educate people, and they really, really do a good job. So please, you've got to get signed up for that if you're not. Thank you all. We will be here. Basil's here. Do you have something you want to say? Do you have anything you want to say? Come come over and see him at Leaf and Limb. They're great. He can answer questions. I'm here, Doug's here, Rich is here. We'll all be happy to answer questions for you. Thank you all for coming.